All right, so welcome to part 4 of our Seed Saver series. The first one we did was on seed saving basics. The second one was, I call it plant breeding because that's basically what it is, but it's just sort of understanding what goes on in your yard and how that impacts your seed saving. The third one was on pollination traffic control and about controlling that pollen movement through your yard. And this one is applying everything for planting your summer seed saving garden. So today's topics, which we will cover in not all this order particularly, is just a basic review, very briefly, of seed saving. And then we'll get into seed saving from your warm summer veggies, planning your summer garden, just very briefly about herbs, a few tips, and some resources. Here are some basil seeds, and I want to point out, so I harvested these basil seeds, and there was some chaff or dried plant matter in there, and I put them in a cup, and I was just able to gently blow and get them nice and clean that way so that they were ready to store. So why plan your seed saving garden? What's the difference between just growing a garden or planning your seed saving garden? And I think the main thing is on how reliable your seeds that you plant next season or later in the season will be. So it's really easy to just walk around your garden and harvest seeds, especially for your summer garden when it's mostly fruits. And you don't really have to put a lot of thought into that. But the thing is that just because I feel like seed saving and getting a seed that you can plant successfully and starting plants from seeds, I feel like those are three different hobbies, three different activities. And so if you plan your summer seed garden or your winter seed garden, then you can have more confidence in the seeds that you save. Most people are seed saving for their home garden and aren't sharing. But if you are sharing with the community, if you're participating in like a seed library where you bring seeds there that other people get, or you're sharing with friends and family, or even just planting your own seeds, you kind of want to have some degree, usually, of confidence that you're planting that squash or you're planting that eggplant or that pepper, and that you're going to get a product out of it because a lot of those seeds will take between 90 and 180 days to mature. And so you're investing your space and your water and your time into something. And if it doesn't make fruits or it makes something weird, then it's kind of a bummer. So I would say that's a big reason to plan. You can just plant as usual and try to um, see what you get. Just know if it's not successful that maybe something went wrong before you even harvest it. Well, things went wrong. If you plant a seed and you don't get what you expect, it all happened months or even a year before you started that garden. So let's look at some different things to consider. So just a few things to note about warm season fruits and veggies. Um, there are many plants that are very easy to seed save from that you grow in the summer. If you think about your cool season veggies, those are mostly plants where we eat the leaves, the stems, the shoots, a lot of times the roots, and the immature flowers. So if you think about a plant's life cycle, and a plant is, start out with it's got its little seed and it sends out its roots first, and then it sends out the stem and it starts to send out some leaves and it will send out a flower and it will have kind of like an immature flower head with the little immature flower parts. These are going to be our celeries, our lettuces, our broccoli, our cauliflower, our radishes, our carrots. And so this plant, those flowers, it doesn't really, we eat it at this point. And so that flower doesn't mature to become a big flower to get pollinated. That flower doesn't start to form its fruit and its seeds. And so a lot of times with our cool season veggie garden, it can be difficult because we eat the plant in its vegetative form. And so if you are going to seed save from a cool season veggie garden, you pretty much need to do it intentionally. Some plants, like say a leaf lettuce, then, you can harvest the leaves and eventually let it go to flower so you can get that seed production and eat the lettuce. But like a carrot, a carrot is a biennial plant, that meaning it needs to be in the ground for 2 seasons or 2 years, or it's like a year and a half, a year. You're not going to get a good eating carrot if you are going to get those seeds. So the summertime is great because most of your summer plants are going to flower and they're making a fruit. Think about tomatoes and peppers and squash and cucumbers and eggplants and watermelon and other melons and all of those. Those are all the fruiting part of the plant. So summer seed saving is a lot easier because you're not having to lose that edible crop or to plan ahead. There's a lot more thought that has to go into a cool season veggie garden than there is in a warm season veggie garden. So lots of plants that easy to save. A lot of our warm season plants are have male and female flowers on the same plant, or they're male and female flower parts on the same flower, so they don't cross-pollinate as much as our cool season veggies. Most of our, or about half, I should say, of our warm season veggies and fruits are mature when we eat them. So we could pick them, eat them, and decide that they're really good, and we might have saved those seeds. Some of them, though, are not ripe when we pick them, so we need to keep that in mind. And then some of the warm season veggies, if you start a warm season crop early and we get early warm weather, then you could harvest tomatoes, and especially cherry tomatoes. You could harvest them in the very late spring, early summer. If we have a warm season, then you could plant them right then and there and then get a second crop out of that plant. And the other thing about warm season veggies is you usually get a lot of seeds too. And some of them you do have to wait till next summer. And then, as I mentioned, a lot of them have male and female flower parts within the same flower. They're a perfect or complete flower. Or a lot of them have male and female flowers on the same plant. So the pollen doesn't usually travel as far. An exception is corn. Corn has the silks on the top and the what do you call it, the corn itself on the side, and so those are the male and female parts, and corn pollen does travel quite a distance. So there are some exceptions. Um, so steps for planting your warm season garden. This is just kind of like a really brief overview. You want to consider your space. Are you doing container gardening? Do you have garden beds? Is your garden in your yard all in the same area? That's most typical, that you have like an area for garden beds. But if you're considering certain things like bell peppers tend to cross-pollinate, then if you were to want to grow a lot of different types of bell peppers to seed save from, then you might want to create some distance, and we'll talk more about that in a little bit. But so maybe if you had a couple areas in your yard where you can plant, that might be helpful, but not necessary. Think about, if you haven't done any seed saving, think about starting with 1 or 2 plants. Tomatoes are like a great gateway seed saving plant because it's not like lettuce where the seeds fly away, or, it's contained within a fruit. It's not like cucumbers where the seeds are immature when we pick the cucumber. So the fruit is mature, the seeds are contained. It's fun to ferment them. That's how you clean them. So tomatoes are a great one to start with, and pretty reliable. And herbs are also a good one to start with. And then just think about how much effort do you want to put into all this. I don't know, as you guys are joining, are you guys seasoned seed savers? Are you like, hey, I want to try this, but I don't know anything? Are you somewhere in between? You can be, I'm kind of a casual seed saver, and that sometimes I find stuff and I'm like, I'm going to save that. And then sometimes I'm like, try to put effort into it, which is not as very often. But then I know that since I'm not putting a lot of effort into it, I tend to like, I'll save seeds from farmers market tomatoes. I know that those are probably going to give me something interesting. It might not match the parent, but it probably will give me it'll probably at least give me a tomato. Um, And so I know because I'm not putting a lot of effort into controlling the pollen, thinking about the parents, watching the flowers, that I know that there's a lot of stuff that I just don't even bother trying to seed save because I might have minimal success. A big key to success is going to be knowing your plants and their parentage. It sounds complicated. It's really not, but it's just like when you're planning your summer seed saving garden or even your winter seed saving garden, knowing a little bit about the parents will make a big difference in your confidence and your success about what you're going to get. And then have just a little bit of a plan as you're laying out. It may be a little bit late, but if you haven't laid out your summer garden yet, use the things I'm going to share with you today for you to consider your timing and your planting locations for your plants. So you may be familiar with the concept of rotating crops. So my grandma planted very successfully for many years tomatoes in the same spot. But a lot of times the recommendation is to rotate out to a different plant family, especially if you have an issue with like nematodes or some sort of pathogen. So a lot of us are familiar with like crop rotation. So maybe you have, your tomatoes in one place and your cucumbers in another place, and then maybe you switch them just to keep pathogens that affect both of those plants from building up, for example. So a lot of times we think about spacing when it comes to crop rotation, but spacing in terms of how things are going to crossbreed is also something you might want to consider. And the one thing nice about container gardening is you can kind of, within reason, in terms of how big your yard or your patio is, you can kind of move stuff around and be planning like, like there's a lot of companion planting information out there, like tomato likes basil kind of information. And the University of California and other universities have done a lot of research on that. And companion planting kind of works if plants utilize different nutrients, if they're planted in the same soil, if they attract or repel different pests. A companion planting, so a lot of that companion planting is a little bit questionable. A companion planting concept, which has been around for thousands of years, is the Three Sisters. It has different names, but it is where you plant like corn and beans and squash. And a lot of that relationship is very logistical. So the corn creates a trellis. The beans will grow up the corn. The beans fix nitrogen in the soil to help the plants. And the squash creates shade to keep moisture in and weeds out. So it's a very like logistical companionship companion planting relationship. But when you're thinking about spacing your plants out, just be a little bit cautious. I mean, it's nothing, no harm, but like things that repel pests or attract pests, if you have something like nasturtiums, which are often used to attract aphids, at some point that nasturtium planting goes from attracting aphids away from your plants to becoming an aphid nursery, and you have to be willing to pull those nasturtiums out or kill the aphids on the nasturtiums. For things like marigolds, which repel pests, if the pests are in the garden and the marigolds are repelling the pests, then they're just driving them to your plant. I don't know. A little bit questionable there, but you could definitely, when you're thinking about your plants and your seed saving, think about spacing. And if your companion planting works for you, I'm not here to say it's not successful. Just have a critical eye or a critical mind when you're looking at companion planting in terms of how you're spacing stuff. So I'm going to just cover really quickly. I'm not going to spend too much time on our YouTube channel. We have like hour-long videos for parts 1 through 3 where I dive into this in more depth. But I just want to if you listen to those, then this is just to kind of reaffirm your knowledge, or maybe you know this already, or if you haven't heard this, this is just to let you know some considerations. So know what you want to grow with your seeds. Are you trying to create something new where you're trying to cross, maybe you're a little bit more of an advanced or gardener, or you have more time on your hands and you want to create that tomato with the um, brandy wine flavor and the skin of aroma or something like that. So maybe you're doing intentional crossbreeding. And so, you can also just put all your plants together and see what you get. Maybe you're trying to get something that looks exactly like the parent plant. That's often what people are trying to do. You're like, this was the best tomato ever. Or with all the summer heat, this tomato or this squash did so well. Or it was so windy and this one plant did really well. I would like to replicate that. So maybe the plant has good characteristics like flavor, hardiness, color, whatever, and you're trying to replicate that. Or you're just like, hey, I'm just going to see what I get and I'm just going to save. Um, and how much trial and error you want to have just depends on how patient you are, how willing you are to plant something next season that may not produce anything. Are you sharing it with somebody so you want to tell them this is what it is? Or you're like, hey, good luck. I don't know what this is. Try it out anyway. When you are um, all of those things basically come down to an entire hour lecture that we did, or lecture, well, it is a lecture, I guess, workshop, whatever you want to call it, on plant breeding, which is just understanding the parents. And what the parents are is going to be what the children are. So, like, if you have a tomato plant, that tomato plant, all of the fruits on the plant will represent the genetics of the parents. But those seeds are going to represent possibly different genetics. So a good way to visualize this is like the Mendel's peas, where you have a purple pea and a white pea. And when they make their first generation, maybe this is the one we're buying at the store. And they all look like that purple pea. But then when you save seeds from them, some of them are going to be like the purple pea, and some of them are going to be like the white pea, the recessive genes. And so knowing the parents, are they hybrids? Are they open pollinated? Is it a plant that crossbreeds easily? And we'll talk about that more. Are they self-pollinating? Do they need a pollinizer, which is another plant? Like an almond needs another pollen. Like if you ever gone up the 5 freeway and you see almonds and they look different, or some of them have like different colored trunks painted. One almond is a pollinizer type and the other one is the one they're usually harvesting. And so a pollinizer is another plant. And then a pollinator could be you, it could be a bee, it could be an ant. So do they need that? And then how many plants do you need for viable seeds? The first time I grew carrots, I grew 1 carrot. Turns out you need several carrots. And I got a thing that looked like a seed, but when you pressed it, it was hollow. So it was not a viable seed. And I had waited 2 years and had school garden kids invested in this carrot, and it was a learning experience for us all. Um, Vegetable families. This is something, and actually now as I'm preparing seed libraries for community gardens and spaces, I'm actually grouping things partially by season, but also by plant family. This was a chart created by a Master Gardener Kit, and I'm not great at scientific names, but I'm definitely starting to learn in the seed saving. This is something that's worth your time to start to get to know what things are in what plant families. So here you can see Kit created this list of different plants in different families. And every plant in the same family can crossbreed. Some plants, like a tomato, is not going to crossbreed with a pepper, very likely. But other plants, like in the Brassica family, these things crossbreed like crazy. And you get all kinds of interesting and sometimes good and sometimes not so good stuff. So think about it like horses and dogs. This is like horses and this is cows and this is dogs and cats. So they can crossbreed, your different types of dogs can crossbreed and give you different things, but they're not going to crossbreed with a cat. So plant families, vegetable families, super helpful to learn as you are on your seed saving journey. You may need to control or assist with pollination. You may need to prevent pollination, and that was our pollination traffic control talk last month. And basically, if the plants crossbreed easily and you have, like, that's what makes a cool season garden difficult because you often grow a lot of brassicas. So if we look back at this brassica list, it would be totally common to have like arugula and broccoli and maybe Brussels sprouts or cabbage, maybe some kale and cauliflower, maybe a radish. Those would be all things that would be like super common to have in a cool season veggie garden. And if they're all flowering at the same time, they could be crossbreeding. Plants that are self pollinating usually are easier to seed save from. The pollen doesn't need to travel as far, so that they don't have the same mechanisms to spread the pollen as far. If you think again about corn, how the corn tassels are on the top, the idea for those corn tassels is to pick up that corn pollen and blow it across long distances to pollinate that corn. And the reason, plants in general have pollen mechanisms to spread themselves out is to keep that plant from becoming too inbred and to keep like genetic strength up. So you may need to, like with squash, if you're going to pollinate squash, since that's often pollinated by a bee, you may choose to, if you have like, different varieties of squash in your garden, but you really want, say you've got this yellow crookneck squash and you maybe have another like a winter squash and whatever, some other kind of patty pan squash or whatever. Maybe you don't want those to crossbreed. So you may actually open the flower right before it's ready to open and hand pollinate it. You can very easily see the male and female flowers on squashes. The female flower underneath the base will have like a little immature flower, a fruit. On cucumbers are super cute because it's like a little tiny cucumber right at the base. And then oh, that's, and then the male flower just has the flower and it has a straight stem. And usually for those squashes, the male flowers come on first, about 2 weeks before the female flowers. Then they'll keep dropping off and then the female flowers will start to come in. And with that, you may actually hand pollinate it, close the flower up so that you know where the pollen source was. And then you actually would maybe tie the string, like tie a string since the flower will fall off, tie a string around the base of that like fruit. And then when you are harvesting, maybe you don't harvest that, say it's a cucumber, for example. Maybe you don't harvest that cucumber because you do need to let the seeds get mature and you let it fully grow and then harvest it. So things to consider is, are you hand pollinating? Are you helping with pollinating? Are you preventing pollinating? If you have bell peppers, one way to prevent cross pollination is to either pick off the flowers of one type or to cover them with gauze or to stagger the plantings. So maybe you have that red bell pepper, you plant it first, and then maybe a month later you plant, or 6 weeks later, you plant the green bell pepper, and then hopefully the red bell pepper makes flowers first, and the green bell pepper will make flowers later. Because they are continuously flowering plants, then maybe you would just be seed saving from the red bell peppers that flowered before the green bell pepper. And then once they're flowering at the same time, you would just enjoy and eat them, but not seed save. So let's look just real quick, very quickly, because we're running a little bit short on time here, at common cool season veggies that might be in your garden right now. We're not going to dive into the whole chart, but these are things you could be seed saving from now as the seeds wrap up. I like this chart from Seed Savers Exchange. I have this resource linked at the end, but also they have a more extensive chart, and this is like my go-to. Usually we use University of California resources, but one of the things I noted is that while the University of California has done a ton of research on individual plants, it's more geared toward commercial seed growers or commercial farmers. And so like carrots is on one page and cucumbers is on another page, and it's not all together. So this Seed Savers Exchange has all this information together, and it talks about the crop. So it gives you the name. You get the species, which I don't focus that much on, but then you get the family. And so everything in the same family, all these Asteraceae or all these Brassica, they can all crossbreed. And so this is where I started to learn the plant families. The life cycle tells you if it's an annual, meaning that it will produce seeds and fruits every year. A perennial will produce, and the annual will die after it makes seeds and fruits usually. The perennial will make, think about rosemary, how it flowers, but the bush lives on. And a biennial is something that will make seeds after a second season. So carrots planted right now, they'll go dormant in the winter, and next spring they'll make their flower head. Sometimes they'll make the flower head early if they're stressed, but usually it takes 2 seasons, which is about a year. The pollination method, so anything that's self-pollinated is going to be more likely to give you what you want and less likely to crossbreed. Something that's wind-pollinated is more likely to spread the genes around, but for example, amaranth breeds pretty true if there's not, and can be kind of invasive actually. Um, and then there's things that are insect pollinated, which means they need that help. Some things like beans are self or insect pollinated. So this kind of helps you know, are you needing to help this plant? Is this plant self-pollinated, so it probably doesn't crossbreed very easily? Anything that's wind pollinated probably crossbreeds very easily. A lot of the brassicas are wind pollinated or insect pollinated. You have the recommended isolation distance, and what this tells you is how far in between plants. So if you have different types of adzuki beans, I don't know if there probably are, then you can have an adzuki bean that's like 20 feet away of a different variety, and it's probably not going to cross-pollinate. If you look at like broccoli, if you have like a couple different types of broccoli or anything else in the brassica family, they are going to cross-pollinate very easily with anything that can be up to like a half-mile away. So they can be tricky to seed save from. So basically for this isolation distance, the shorter the isolation distance, the less likely they are to crossbreed. Viable seeds, this is an important column. This is where I got screwed up with the carrots. You need 5 carrots approximately. Asparagus, for example, you need a male and a female plant. So this is the number of plants. Usually for home seed savers, we're operating in the viable seeds category. So this will give you a seed that will grow, but it is, not going to give you like identical parentage. And if you're trying to maintain a variety, you can see you need quite a bit more plants. So seed companies that are selling you seeds are growing in these numbers. And a lot of times when seed companies are growing seeds, they will, for example, have like their big field of carrots, and then maybe the ones that they grow for commercial production, carrot seed commercial production, they'll harvest from the center to make sure that it really matches the parent. That when it says on that seed packet that it is, Nantes or whatever carrot, that is actually what it is. So we usually, as home seed savers, focus on this viable seed category. In my resources, I have a guide to this chart, and then there's also a section that will give you these definitions again. It took me a couple readings of them to remember them. So, this is the format we're going to use for our warm season veggies, just based on the time. I'm just going to kind of flip through these. But basically, I took the section of the chart, and I took this little chart, and I filled it out for each of the cool season veggies that we'll go over. So we talked about broccoli. It's difficult to seed save because it crossbreeds easily. It needs to flower. You lose the produce. It's insect pollinated. You need 5 plants. So we're just going to flip through these just based on the time. But these are some things that you guys can look back as we go through the warm season veggies. If you have any cool season veggies that are harvesting, you can look back at this presentation. I can email it to everyone who registered, and you can compare. So we also talked about carrots using the chart, and kind of put them as a medium, and they crossbreed easily. You lose the produce. So sometimes when I'm growing carrots, I will grow some to eat and some to seed save from. Here's radishes. We have another one for lettuce. We'll go over this for the warm season veggies so you'll understand. But basically, I copied the line out of my chart. I had a few questions to answer, and this sort of guided what I needed to do. So you can use this format for anything else that you're growing. How difficult they are, that's a little bit subjective. You can articulate why they're difficult. You can write down how they're pollinated, how many plants you need for viable seeds, what their isolation distance is, and other tips for success. So as you are starting to seed save, this may be just as notes for you, kind of as you're planning some things to write down. So, some common herbs, cilantro, basil are easy to start from seeds. Rosemary is actually really easy to start from cuttings. Lavender does best started from cuttings. Fennel, dill, and bee balm and borage are really easy to start from seeds. But they're actually so easy they can be kind of invasive, so you have to watch those seed productions. And if you are seed saving from those, you want to make sure to catch those seeds, or you're going to have those plants like everywhere. And then mint has really small seeds, but you can grow it from seeds. And then mint, you probably know, does really well from runners, and it just sort of sends out endless pieces of its own plant. So you could use the same chart for herbs. The Seed Savers Exchange Guide, I don't think it has as much information on too many herbs. I think it lists a few herbs, but not too many. So if your summer veggies have bolted, I'm sorry, your winter veggies have bolted, then let them go to seed. They're also, this is a cabbage, I think, great for pollinators. They can be really pretty, and the pollinators love them, and then you can save seeds from them. So that is one nice thing about this time of year with your cool season veggies, is that you can be letting your plants go to flower, because sometimes they get kind of tough with the heat. And you can't stop the flowering anyway at some point. So let the pollinators enjoy them, and then just try to harvest the seeds and see what you get. So for your summer seed garden, you want to know the parents so that, is it a hybrid? Is it a heirloom? We'll talk about that in just a moment. You want to know how much space they need. So are you planting, 5 different kinds of bell peppers? They might need some more space. Tomatoes seem to do okay if you plant them fairly close together, like in the same bed. They seem to breed pretty true, or you get kind of like if you have cherry tomatoes next to Roma tomatoes, your Roma will make a Roma and your cherry will make a cherry. Watch for flowering and going to seed. So keep that in mind, just be mindful of that part of the process, and that will help you kind of figure out, do you need to do something to prevent some cross pollination, or just being ready to catch the seeds and see if any pollination traffic control is needed. So one thing, just real quick, the term true to type or breeding true basically means that you get the seed that matches the parent. So if you're crossbreeding something, hybridizing something, then it's not going to necessarily breed true to type. It may still give you what you want, but it's not matching the parent. So again, just real quick, knowing the parents, the time to find out your parent information is usually when you're purchasing that plant. You can look online, you can read labels, for like an early girl tomato. An early girl is a hybrid variety. So if you look online, you can see that information. You can read the labels, although plant labels really don't have much information anymore. And if you don't know the parentage, you can still grow it out. You just don't know what, you get the fruit, but you don't know what the seeds of the fruit will give you. Or maybe 2 generations, 2 years from now, maybe it'll start to get some weird variations. Another vocab term is a phenotype versus genotype. And a genotype is the way what something's genetics are. So if you think about a blue-eyed parent and a brown-eyed parent, and they have a blue-eyed child, they'll have a recessive blue-eyed gene and a dominant brown-eyed gene, something, it's the genetics of the parent. A phenotype is the way something looks. So when you are growing something out, a lot of times on the home seed saving level, we don't necessarily worry about the genetics, but we worry about how something looks or tastes. Things to look out for to know if something is a hybrid is the term hybrid. F1 is another term that indicates something is a hybrid, and that means first filial generation. So it's the cross of 2 parents. So that can tell you that maybe those seeds are going to give you something that may not be very reliable. And GMOs, I say here, are not part of the home gardening seeds that are available, although they do now have a purple tomato and a glow-in-the-dark petunia. But all other seeds are not going to be GMO unless you're purchasing like 1,000 pounds of corn or soybeans. Open pollinated just means that something didn't have control, like it was pollinated openly. It wasn't intentionally hybridized, but just remember that something that's open pollinated, it doesn't mean that it can't get crossbred in your yard. The term heirloom and wild sourced, often have kind of loose meanings. Heirloom just means it's been bred for a long time, but there's not really like a specific definition. And wild sourced, that term has, so just be careful with those terms. They don't necessarily mean one specific thing when you're purchasing stuff. So even with better or open pollinated seeds, which is like usually the open pollinated is considered like a better seed to save for summer seed saving, you still may get cross pollination within your yard. So isolation distance is the biggest job when it comes to creating your summer garden is looking at what you're growing. So make a list of what you're growing. So tomatoes, maybe you're growing 5 different types of tomatoes, and then look at what kind of isolation distance they need. Just out of experience, I know they can all be in a 5 by 5 foot bed and give pretty consistent results, even though they need like 10 to 20 feet to like breed true. They often, because they have male and female flower parts, then they often just produce pretty reliable seeds. So make a list, of your bell peppers. Bell peppers are in the same family as tomatoes. They won't crossbreed with your tomatoes, but bell peppers crossbreed pretty easily with each other. So this is the why I recommend you guys just kind of pick 1 or 2 things and then get to do some internet research and reach out to the Master Gardener helpline, try things out, and get to know each plant one by one so that after a couple years you have, 5 or 10 plants under your belt and you can know a little bit more about their specifics. Also remember that in addition to isolation distances that are physical, you can also create isolation distances through time by having your plants flower at different times of the year. So we're going to go through just a few more points and then we're going to go through some examples. So if you are using time as isolation distance, so you have your bell pepper, like I said, your red bell pepper flower at one time and your green bell pepper flower at another time, or your squash flowering, one type of squash flowering at one time. You just need to watch those flowers and be mindful that as long as they're flowering at the same time, they can cross-pollinate. Another thing to keep in mind is the fruit mature when we eat it? So cucumbers are not mature when we eat them. Eggplants are not mature when we eat them. Summer squash is not mature when we eat them. And then, like for your cool season veggies, that seed will come when the plant bolts. So also just getting to know when your fruits are mature. Like if you think about cucumbers, a lot of people are surprised that that fruit is not mature when we eat it. But then when we think about the fact, imagine if cucumber seeds were not sort of white and floppy, they were hard, like they are in the packets when we buy the seed packet at the store. That would be a pretty like undesirable cucumber situation. So yeah, we kind of instinctively know that those seeds aren't mature, but maybe we haven't connected those things. So we already talked a lot about pollination traffic control, and I want to get to our to our examples. But basically, controlling that pollen allows us to decide the parentage of the seeds. It might be needed. You may be needing to help facilitate pollination. A lot of people have to hand pollinate squash if they get low production, or if they're growing several different types of squash. And then you may need to restrict access to pollinators once you have hand pollinated by closing off that flower. So let's look at some examples here. And we have tomatoes, cucumbers, squash, beans, peppers, melons, etc., etc. If they have a W next to them, it's a wet seed. And if they have a D next to it, it's a dry seed. So a wet seed is going to be inside a fleshy fruit, and a dry seed is going to dry on the plant. So here's tomatoes. Okay, and so what I did was I went back to that chart and I copied out the section on tomatoes. So I have all the information here. So I know it's a wet seed, so it's going to be inside of a fleshy fruit. Is it mature when we eat the tomatoes? Yes. The seeds are, and the plant is mature. Do you need to ferment it? With tomatoes, they have a casing outside of the seed. So if you put a bunch of tomato seeds in a jar, you'll see they don't touch each other. There's like a gelatinous covering. The only 2 that I can think of are tomatoes and cucumbers. Those are the ones that need to be fermented most commonly. I'm not sure if there's like a third one, but tomatoes and cucumbers are the ones that most commonly need to be fermented. I know that based on the chart that the tomatoes are self-pollinating. I know that they usually don't need hand pollination, but sometimes people get a toothbrush and they do some hand pollinating just to move that pollen around. I know what family it's in, so I know what it might cross-pollinate, and then through experience, I know that it's not very likely to cross-pollinate with other plants in the family, unlike brassicas, which do. The isolation distance is 10 to 50 feet, so it's kind of short to medium. Um, how many plants for viable seeds? You just need one, and then you can make some other notes. So that's tomatoes. If we look at cucumbers, then it's a wet seed. It's not mature when we eat it. So the plant, if we were going to seed save from cucumbers, look at these seeds when we eat it versus when we seed save, you need to leave some cucumbers on the plant. So don't harvest them. Let them get tough. Let the stem, they're mature when the stem starts to dry off and they kind of fall off. Then they're mature. You do need to ferment cucumber seeds based on the chart. It says they're insect pollinated. I put they're self-pollinating, but it looks like they're insect pollinating, so they do need a little bit of help. With an insect, if you don't, you could look up what that insect is. Most likely that insect is present in your yard for cucumbers, but you may need to do some hand pollinating. It's in the cucurbit family, and so it may pollinate with other cucurbits. But probably most likely if you had like multiple varieties of cucumbers, like I don't think a cucumber is very likely to cross-pollinate with a squash, which is also in the cucurbit family, but it's probably likely to cross-pollinate with other types of cucumbers. So if you were saving from cucumbers and you were growing like 5 different cucumbers, then you might want to consider hand pollinating and then sealing off a couple cucumber flowers in order to get that variety to breed true. If you only grew one type of cucumbers, it probably wouldn't be an issue. You only need one plant for viable seeds. If we look at squash, so squash is a wet seed. Winter squash is mature when eaten, so you don't need to mature it on the plant. It's already mature. Summer squash is not mature, so if you were going to save summer squash, you would need to leave a couple fruits on until the stem started to dry. It doesn't need to be fermented. It is self-pollinating sometimes, but definitely needs an insect to help it out or hand pollinating. I would not really call it self-pollinating. It has male and female flowers on the same plant, but you really need an insect or something to move that pollen around. Sometimes wind will cut it, but not very often. So it needs pollination help from an insect. It is in the cucurbit family, just like cucumbers, but more likely to cross-pollinate with other squashes. So not likely to cross-pollinate with a cucumber, but more likely with other squashes. And you can see the isolation distance for other squashes are going to be pretty far. So again, if you were seed saving from squashes, you might want to consider tying a couple off after you hand pollinate them to make sure those seeds give you what you want, or just see what the seeds give you and just know if it gives you something weird, it probably cross-pollinated. So beans are a dry seed. Beans are not mature when we eat them. They need to dry on the plant. They're not fermented. You just let them dry on the plant. They are self or insect pollinating. They're in the Fabaceae family, so if you grow a lot of other plants in the Fabaceae family at the same time, they may cross-pollinate, but you only need one plant to get a viable seed. So melons, you would do the same way. We're kind of running out of time, but melons, you would go into the chart. So what I would do for melons is I would open up this chart. It would depend, are you doing watermelon, which is also actually in the cucurbit family, or are you doing another melon like a muskmelon or a cantaloupe type melon? You would use this. You can see that they're insect pollinated. You can see you only need one plant. And say you were growing 4 or 5 different types of melons, you can see that the isolation distance is pretty far. So you'd probably want to, for the melons, you'd probably want to hand pollinate and close off that flower. If you were going to look at peppers, then you would pull up the chart on peppers. And hot peppers don't seem to crossbreed as much as bell peppers. So let's see if they have, let's see how they do peppers. So you would go down the chart. You can see peppers in the Solanaceae family. They are self or insect pollinated. If you noticed, remember tomatoes were 10 to 50 feet cross pollination, and peppers are 300 to 1600 feet. So they cross pollinate a lot more easily. Basically, the larger the isolation distance, the more likely they are to cross pollinate. Let's see if they separate out bell peppers or hot peppers. They don't. So you would go down here to peppers and you would tell yourself, okay, that this plant might need an insect or can be self-pollinating. I only need one plant to get viable seeds, but if I'm growing other bell peppers, especially, then I probably need to isolate it from other bell peppers. So maybe you plant the one that you're seed saving from first, and then you wait like 6 weeks to plant the other ones, and you just save the bell pepper seeds from the initial plant. Or you just save the seeds and you plant them all together and you see what happens. And if it gives you something weird, it was probably that cross-pollination. Eggplant, so you would do the same thing with eggplant. You would go over here to eggplant. You would roll up your list here. You can see that eggplant, also in the Solanaceae family, self or insect pollinated, but it has that larger isolation distance. So if you're growing more than one variety of eggplant, it probably will cross-pollinate. It is a wet seed. It's not mature when eaten. I should say no, so no, it needs to mature. You don't need to, you don't need to ferment the eggplant seed. So that's a no on that one. And so that's how you would go. So these are just some examples. Lettuce was in our cool season example. So that one, you could look back on the PowerPoint. Also radishes you can grow in the summer are on that example. So that's how I would use this chart. I don't memorize this information. I use the chart when I'm planning something. And so I would just start getting to know this chart. And then a lot of times what I use this chart for is to figure out what went wrong. So I'm like, that didn't work. What did I do wrong? And I go back to this chart, like with my carrots, if you scroll up to your carrots, you can see corn. You need 10 corn plants to get viable seeds, and it needs 800 feet to a quarter mile to have breed true, and it's wind pollinated. So corn can be a little bit tricky. When you're on your carrots, you can see that for carrots, you need 5 plants, and they actually cross-pollinate. So actually, if you live in the East Coast and there's a lot of wild carrots, you need to be a little bit careful about that cross-pollination with wild carrots. We don't have as much problem here in California, but just something to be mindful of. So to wrap up, oops, get on my buttons here. Fruit trees, just to point out fruit trees, if you do grow fruit trees from seed, when you're buying them from the store, they've taken them from cuttings and the cuttings are mature budwood that's ready to fruit. And so it can give you a couple fruits in the first year and you get good fruit production after like 5 to 7 years. When you're growing from seed, that plant material has to go through sexual maturity in order to make fruit. So that can take many, many more years. A lot of fruit seeds are heavily cross-pollinated. There is no guarantee that that seed will give you a match to the parent. A lot of times those fruit seeds will produce a fruit tree, but not fruit. And then you also don't have the benefits of the rootstock, like disease resistance. So just a note about fruit trees. So a couple tips for success. For your dry seeds or your wet seeds, you want to make sure they're thoroughly dry before storing them. So if you have a seed that's in a fleshy plant, think about how that seed is when you buy it in a packet. I like to call it snappable. So a tomato seed can take a week or two to dry depending on how humid it is and how hot it is. So after you finish the fermentation process, which we'll do a presentation on, but you can also find some pretty reliable information. You just basically soak it in water, let the water ferment the casing off, pour it off, repeat a few times, and then let it dry. But you want that seed to fully dry. So any of those wet seeds, you want to make sure they're fully dry before you store them to reduce mildew and mold. And for your dry seeds, you just want to make sure they're dry on the plant. You want to store them in a cool, dry place. And then you want to regrow them each year or each season. Seed viability a seed can last for 8,000 or couple thousand years. But for the most part, after the first year, viability starts to go down. So if you have an amazing tomato, maybe consider growing half out each year so that you only have a seed that's a couple years old, but also consider saving like a couple in case your crop fails. You don't lose all of those seeds and you can try again later in the season or next season. Make sure you label everything. Make sure your seeds are fully mature before harvest. And so again, with about half of your warm season veggies, make sure that when you harvest it, you maybe you harvest all your cucumbers at one time. You're like, that's the best cucumber I've ever had. But you've harvested all the cucumbers and now you can't save those seeds. So maybe when you harvest things like eggplant and summer squash and cucumbers, things that you harvest when the seeds are immature, then maybe leave one on the plant until you've tasted it and you know if it's the best ever. For things like tomatoes and peppers, those are mature when you harvest them. Your winter squash, they're mature. Your melons are mature when you harvest them. So those you can just save the seed right out of the plant. And your beans, you would want to leave a few beans on the vine and let them dry on the plant. Those seeds are immature when we eat them. And then just don't forget, you can create isolation distance by time if plants aren't flowering at the same time. Another thing you could do is you could temporarily cover one of your plants so that the pollen isn't spreading. You could cover it with gauze, or you could put like a tomato cage over it and cover it with like a gauzy material to reduce cross-pollination if you have a fairly small gardening space. The other thing, if you have plants in containers, you could just move your bell peppers to the other side of the yard for a little bit while the one is flowering. And once the fruit has set, I don't know how long that flowering period is. Mm, Say it's like 5 to 10 days, 3 to 10 days, 3 to 7 days, something like that. They just need to be isolated during that time or protected from each other during that time. Or you can also close off the flower once you hand pollinate it so that you know that you don't get that cross pollination. Oops, what happened? Stop sharing. Oops. No, no. Hold on. Sorry about that, guys. Okay. So my last slides are so what's next? Just start small. Think about seed saving when you buy your plants. Look for varieties that are open pollinated. Heirloom is not a term that's like an heirloom plant is open pollinated, but not all open pollinated plants are heirloom. So heirloom isn't necessarily the key word. There's a lot of open pollinated plants that are great to seed save from. If you see anything that says hybrid or F1, then you know it's a hybrid plant. Just be opportunistic too, and just catch seeds as they appear and see what happens. And it takes time. So just be patient with yourself and just start learning. I've been working on this for probably 8 or so 9 years, and there's still lots that I don't know. And a lot of what I know helps me figure out why I fail, rather than it's like I'm really so intentional about doing things. And herbs and tomatoes are great. Herbs, tomatoes, peas, and beans are great places to start. Also, hot peppers, and squashes and melons. Those are some great places to start to make you feel successful. For your summer garden, tomatoes are like the easiest one, I would say. So I'll send this PowerPoint out to everybody who registered. Here are the links to those terms and to the charts. I've got 2 pages of those, all from Seed Savers Exchange. They have redone their website a little bit, but I'm pretty sure all these links still work. And once you get in the Seed Savers Exchange website, you can find all of the information. You can check out upcoming classes on our website or on our social media pages. And then here is our helpline information. So I don't know if anybody has any questions they think should be on the recording. And if not, I'll stop the recording. And then if anybody has any questions they'd like to ask offline, I'm happy to answer those. All right, I'm going to go ahead. I don't hear anybody unmuting. I'm going to go ahead and stop recording. Thanks so much for joining, and join us for next month's Seed Saver Talk on the first Thursday in June. All right, happy gardening, everyone.